Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be ranking the Era 3 men who have done at least 3 seasons of the challenge. So I'm doing this video and the Era 3 women at the exact same time, which is why it took me a bit longer to get both of them out, and I want to put both of them out roughly at around the same time. So, like the other 4 videos, I am going to go over the rules and the stipulations that I have used to determine my rankings, though some of them won't matter as much for Era 3 and Era 4 than they did for Era 1 and Era 2. And I'm going to get into those specific seasons or those specific criteria that doesn't fit much here when I get there. I don't believe that I will have as much to say about the Era 3 men compared to the men of the prior 2 eras because one, there's much less of them compared to the Era 2 and especially the Era 1 men. And two, they played recently enough where I don't really have to consider format changes and all the jankiness compared to the earlier seasons. So things will be a lot more straightforward here. So, the first category that I am looking into is the competitions. So, this involves the dailies, eliminations, and the final performances. Dailies, I'm not going to focus on as much because I'm just not. And usually, when it came to the dailies, I put this into heavy consideration for a lot of the earlier era seasons where a lot of those daily wins were due to team daily wins and they weren't really solo or pair daily. So that's why I considered them. But that will probably be something that I do when I rank everyone who did at least 3 seasons and comparing people from different eras. So the one thing that I am looking forward to, or that I'm considering when it comes to the competitions, is that if someone has more early boots on their resume, so for this list, this fits under people who were out in the first 2 rounds, they will be lower on the list. But even if you have a lot of earlier met boots, you're going to be lower on the list compared to someone who always does well, makes it to the end game, makes it to the final, or wins. So that just kind of just makes sense there. So the other category that I am looking into is the amount of finals that a person has reached, the amount of finals that a person has won, and the amount of seasons where they were close to getting to the final. And when I mean close to the final, I mean getting eliminated in the last 2 rounds before the final starts. So that's kind of where I consider the end game. So if you thrive in more seasons and if you do really well in more seasons where you fit under one of the 3 categories, at least you'll be higher on the list, which makes sense because it shows that you consistently do well. There are a few seasons within the people that debuted in Era 3 that has team wins, but it's not as many. But due to the seasons where they were team seasons, or there are seasons that switched the formats to where they were put in teams, I do consider team dailies to be inflated when it comes to the daily record, especially since you could suck at that particular chance, but because you are on the right team, that team win counts as a daily win for you. So I do have to keep the fact that team challenges do inflate daily numbers. So I won't weigh them as highly here. Obviously, if you have a bad elimination record, you will be lower on the list since it means that one, you can't avoid elimination to make it to the end, and two, it also means that you can't save yourself once you are in elimination. So it means that your chances of getting eliminated and not lasting long in a season to be very high. Also, the final thing that I am putting in this category is that the more finals lost and the more finals missed, and the more seasons where you're not close to the final, you are lower on the list because it means that you can't make it to the end, and there's always something that causes you to be out earlier. The second category that I am considering here is longevity. So this refers to the amount of seasons someone did and the right bracket of years that they competed on. The second category, or that second part, I'm not considering as much because the earliest an Era 3 person could have debuted on the show was 2011, and the latest they could have debuted in the era is 2017. So it's not like there are people who competed 20 to 25 years ago, like some of the Era 1 and Era 2 people, and most of those seasons were old. And a lot of the formatting issues or the older formats were before Era 3. So obviously, the less seasons they did, the lower they are going to be on the list, just simply due to the fact that they don't have as much data compared to some of the others who have done twice, thrice, or 4 times the amount of seasons. But they have a decent enough of a pool to look into their stats, which is why 3 seasons is the minimum criteria here. Also, seasons that are only done in a few years are lower on the list. Obviously, this isn't as much of a factor compared to the people who debuted on Era 1 and Era 2, but it is still a factor here since if you only competed in a few years compared to someone who competed in 14 years, which is the amount that's the earliest Era 3 person could have competed in, we don't really see how we've grown, really. So it just makes to give someone who's done well in all of those 14 years, if they've been competing for 14 years compared to someone who's only played for 2 to 3 years. So, yeah. Also, this kind of just leads into my next point. The more seasons someone has done, the better. So let's just say you did 3 seasons and you did well on 3 seasons. Let's just say we're comparing them to someone who did 12 seasons and they did well on like 10, 11, or all 12 other seasons. The person who has done well on more seasons, they deserve more credits because they've been, not only have they've been able to replicate that success on several other seasons, but they've been able to do it on several other years compared to someone who's only had success on a few seasons overall or someone who only did a few seasons. This also kind of just leads to what I was briefly talking about earlier. People who have thrived on seasons that are many years apart and they've seen success in many years and many decades. I guess in this case, a decade or a decade and a half, they're going to be ranked higher than someone who's only had success in a few years. So that's kind of how I put it all together for this group when it came to longevity. So the next category and criteria that I am considering are eras and formats. Obviously, this isn't going to be as big of a deal with the Era 3 women or Era 3 and Era 4 people just in general because most of the seasons from this point onward are either paired seasons or individual seasons. Just from the back of my mind, there are only 2 seasons that are team seasons from this point onward, though there are a few other seasons that have a switched format in Era 4, where a portion of those seasons were team seasons. But in general, almost all of the seasons from this point onwards are paired seasons or individual seasons, so it's harder to make it to the end and to have success in these seasons. So there are no seasons or eras where there are no eliminations from this point onward, so that's not criteria like it was for Era 1 and Era 2. The more success you have on dual or individual seasons, you'll be higher on the list since they are more competitive. There's less people in the finals, therefore less people winning, and it means more people are getting eliminated compared to some of the older eras. There are no seasons from this point onwards where there are vote-offs or everyone goes to the finals, so that's really not a consideration for them. So I do have people who thrive on team seasons with barely any eliminations will be lower on the list. But I will say that the team seasons from this point onwards, they do have a lot more eliminations compared to some of those Era 1 and Era 2 team seasons. Obviously, from this point onwards, the seasons are considered more modern when it comes to their format and time frame, so success in modern seasons will have you higher on the list, though that won't really be much of a factor for people from this point onwards because they are competing on modern seasons. The final category that I am considering for these rankings is politics. So this will involve the type of alliances that people are in that got them success in their seasons or through several seasons, whether they can get into an alliance or not, what type of moves that they make to better position themselves throughout that particular season or seasons, and also, if you are using politics and you are avoiding eliminations due to politics, where that should definitely be given credit to. So this is just going to be a talking voice that I mentioned throughout all of their sections. It's not going to be something that you visually see on the screen. So, at dead last, which is 15th place for this list, is Thomas Buell, who competed on Battle of the Exes 2, Battle of the Bloodlines, and Rivals 3. There really isn't much to discuss about him as a player on the challenge, partially due to his limited amount of seasons, and also due to his really poor track record. Thomas was paired with his ex Haley on his first season Battle of the Exes 2, where they booted against Avery and Johnny after being thrown into elimination in the second round, but became the first eliminated officially once they lost the first redemption to Dustin and Jessica. His most notable season all around was Battle of the Bloodlines, where he and his brother Stephen were aligned with Cara Maria and Jamie, and they had a good enough thing going for them, as he was on the winning team that won a bunch of dailies. He did win an elimination against Kahada, but they were eliminated halfway through the season due to his affair with Cara Maria being added, but it was his brother who partook and lost in the elimination. And on his final season, Rivals 3, he and Simone really did nothing, though she pissed off Ashley enough for her and Cory to nominate them for the third round, despite him and Cory being friends from the Real World season, where he quit because his girlfriend had an emergency. He never came close to making it far or deep onto a season, and he didn't do much of anything, so here he is. At 14th place is Ryan Knight, who competed on Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, and Battle of the Exes 2. I first just want to say rest in peace to him. He debuted on Battle of the Seasons 2, where he was on the New Orleans team. I think they were close to the main alliance, but they weren't an important member of it, and they were seen as weaker. They weren't notable whatsoever in the season, though he and Jimmy did win a daily on their own in the season, but they were booted mid-season against Sam and Zach. Rivals 2 was his best season, as he was partnered with Preston, where they did win an elimination against Derek and Rob, but they were not in the major alliances of the season from my recollection. Though they might have benefited from having ties to Jimmy and Camilla, but the women weren't that close to them, but the men wanted them around because they were easy layups, which had their fate sealed when they lost the final male elimination to Jordan and Marlon. And on his final season, Battle of the Exes 2, where he and Jimmy were of course paired up, they didn't really do well, where they got last in the fourth daily, causing them to go into the fourth elimination, where they lost to Adam and Brittany, and then he got DQ'd in their first redemption challenge, causing them to be the third players booted overall. He really hasn't accomplished much of anything during his short career and only had one good season, which still isn't the strongest, as they were intentionally kept around to be an easy late elimination boot fodder or a weak finalist. At 13th is Preston Robertson-Charles, who competed on Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, and Free Agents. So a lot of this content is kind of just going to be repeated, since what fits Knight kind of just fits Preston as well. His first season was Battle of the Seasons 2, where he was a part of the New Orleans team, who were in a decent enough spot. Once all the obvious big targets were removed from the game, someone else needed to go in, and he and Mackenzie were sent in with hopes to boot Chet and Sarah, i.e. Team Brooklyn, but that failed with them losing a bit before the midway part of the season. He was paired with Knight on Rivals 2, and they ended up winning an early elimination against Derek and Rob. And they were kept around because they were seen as the weaker layups, as they didn't win a daily, where they were booted right before the final against Marlon and Jordan. And then on Free Agents, he was always picked last because he was seen as the weakest man of the group, but he did help his team win a daily or two. Despite all of that, he was booted against Kahara roughly 2/3 through the season. So he is higher than Knight because he at least did an individual season decently, and his worst season is better than Knight's worst season. But in general, they're both very similar when it comes to their stats and their journey throughout the show, and neither made it to the final. At 12th is Dario Medrano, who competed on Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, Invasion of the Champions, and Dirty 30. Dario debuted during the same time as Tony, Cory, Delvin, Nelson, and that group, but he didn't make nearly as much of a mark on a competitive point of view. He debuted on Battle of the Bloodlines and was trying to take out the veterans and was one of the louder rookies, where he and his brother were thrown into the fourth elimination against Cory and Mitch, where he caused his brother to lose the elimination. So that I do fault him for, since they would have won earlier, and despite him not playing in the elimination, he distracted his brother. And then he was on Rivals 3, paired with Nicole, where they were pretty under the radar for the first bit. And there was a coalition of the Underdog Alliance that was forming to take out the cousins, but he ratted them out and used his power to break it up by sending home Cory and Ashley, just so he could be the third person taken to the final. But that didn't even happen, as he was booted fourth against Bananas and Sarah right before the final. He won the first daily on Invasion of the Champions, which gave him a place in the Oasis, but he was booted mid-season when he was thrown in against Nelson. And then on his final flagship season, 30-30, it had him flying under the radar, way too under the radar, but it did bring him pretty far in the season, though he lost to Tony early. On no, he lost to Tony in the elimination that he played in, and then lost the third redemption to CT and Jordan. He has never been booted too early, but only made it far on one season, and he has an unimpressive elimination record, so he's just met at best on the show. It will be interesting to see what All Stars 5 does for his resume. At 11th is Dustin Zito, who competed on Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Free Agents, and Battle of the Exes 2. Honestly, I might put him lower than some of the others, since he is hugely inconsistent, as he's either an early boot or a finalist. On his first season Battle of the Exes 1, he actually performed decently in the challenges with Heather, but his injury caused them to be DQ'd early on, where they either would have followed the other rookies in being sent home immediately, or they could have actually made the distance. He was on the Vegas team on Battle of the Seasons 2, and they found themselves kicked out of the main alliance after a few rounds, and the infighting continued, but they were able to win a few dailies and won in elimination with Nani and Trishelle each. The first one beating Laura and Trey, and the second one beating Marie and Rob, causing him and Trishelle to get second place, despite not knowing one another before the season, and hating one another. His streak of bad luck starts after that, getting booted second on Free Agent against a close elimination with Frank, and then booted in the first round with Jessica against Adam and Brittany, where the redemption twist booted them up to being the second official boot, beating Thomas and Haley, then losing to Simone and John. He has more bad seasons than good seasons, and I can only go off of potential and one strong season, where he is weaker in other elements, socially and physically. So here he is. The one strong season and making it to the final bumped him up over the others, but I can't ignore the other three seasons, and I could easily be talked into putting him lower. At 10th is Johnny Reilly, who competed on Free Agents, Battle of the Exes 2, and Rivals 3. So he's someone who's really just kind of baseline in the fact that he did limited seasons, i.e. 3, and he had a good season, a mess season, and a bad season. On his first season, he was lucky to not even go into elimination, so that was the result of never pulling the kill card, and he managed to get in good with a lot of people, especially the men. He won several dailies, though all but one of them were really big group wins, and he was close to beating Bananas on Free Agents in the final, where he got second place. Success on an individual season is great, but his following season showed that he's a mixed bag on partner seasons, at best, as he's just not a good partner. We saw this with his ex Avery on Battle of the Exes 2, where they barely spoke outside of the competitions and they were thrown right into elimination due to the poor communication issues twice, but they did win 2 eliminations and made it roughly past the midway point of the season, winning against Haley and Thomas and Adam and Brittany, who were on a streak, but lost to Naya and Leroy, and losing to Johnny and Nani in the redemption. And then his final season was awful, where for both rounds, he and Jessica were in eliminations because they got dead last, and winning an elimination with Jessica against Cheyenne and Devin couldn't make up for the lack of team chemistry, being the second boot against Amanda and Nelson. Overall, just a relatively mediocre but slightly inconsistent career, hence him placing in the middle here. I will say that he has a pretty solid elimination record, despite never going into elimination on Free Agent, so I bumped him up a bit overall. At ninth place is Tony Reigns, who competed on Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, Invasion of the Champions, Dirty 30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, Battle of the Eras, and All Stars 4. So he was clearly someone that the challenge producers and MTV were heavily trying to hype up as their next face of the show. And Despite that heavy push, he never really lived up to that. Tony was paired with his brother for his first season, Battle of the Bloodlines, where he got into several arguments with the women, and he ended up physically fighting his brother. He did nothing notable overall, and an injury during the third challenge caused them to be DQ'd early on in the season. Rivals 3 was not a notable season for Tony either. Despite being partnered with Camilla, they did nothing notable competitively and strategically, though I'm sure that the DQ and quit in the first half did not help, but they would have been in a good enough position due to their closeness with the legs of Bananas. Unfortunately for him, he and Camille couldn't get along, and their arguments caused them to be DQ'd mid-season. Invasion of the Champions had him on the opposite side of the contenders as he picked a fight with Nelson and only had Kayla, Nicole, Jenna, and Cory to rely on, where he had to take out Bruno in the first elimination, which got him to the Oasis, but he was sent home by Shane in the first vote post-Oasis early on in the season. Things started turning around for Tony on Dirty 30, though he started the season with the same trend as his prior seasons, being booted in the second round against rookie Ammo, and barely winning the redemption against Dario to get back into the house, where it was kind of just by luck, really. He did win a few dailies in the season, only one of them was a large team win, and won an elimination against Dario, where he made it to the final round, where he was purged right before the final. Fernandez is obviously his breakthrough season, where he and Zach ran out of the politics of the season, won several dailies in the season, and made the move to turn on Bananas, in addition to screwing people over like Natalie and Brittany, avoiding elimination all season only to fumble in the final, not even making it to the second part of it. Final Reckoning was another pretty good season for him, despite arriving late due to Devin quitting the season initially and the entire house after him and Bananas, but they performed well in most of the dailies, winning their fair share of them, despite being booted by Joss and Sylvia later on in the season, where they're able to beat Shane and Nelson in the final redemption, only to lose to Polly and Natalie right afterwards in the final round before the final. He took a hiatus for the next several years and came back on All Stars 4, where it seemed like he would be in a good position due to all the people that he knew, but he ended up quietly quitting the game soon after arriving. No one thought much of this until he had an early exit again on Battle of the Eras, where he was sent into the first elimination with Leroy, which he won, and then nominated himself to go in to the next round despite winning immunity. Due to this, he was sent home against Dara in the second round, though many claimed that he wanted to quit. Tony had a few impressive seasons, but he has more non-impressive seasons, and the fact that he only made it to one final out of all the seasons that he did isn't a good look. And it seems like the drive just isn't there for him anymore to want to do better on the show. At 8th is Nelson Thomas, who competed on Rivals 2, Invasion of the Champions, Dirty 30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, Total Madness, Double Agents, Spice Nights and Allies, Ride or Dies, and World Championship. Nelson's first season, Rivals 3, was a season that he wasn't supposed to be on, but there's really nothing notable here, since due to him and Amanda being rookies, arriving late, and her pissing off everyone, he didn't have much room to last long in the season, going out in the second round that he joined to Jamie and Kellyanne after beating Johnny and Jessica in their first elimination. Invasion of the Champion was a season that caused him to make an impression on the show, where he really was one of the key figures of the other side of the house and had a lot of numbers, but he really isn't strategic at all. He won the final elimination over Anthony to get into the Oasis and was able to trick Cory and Shane to get his spot in the final, where he was very close to beating CT. The Young Bucks were formed in this season, and I also forgot to mention that he also beat Dario. Despite the Young Bucks forming, they never really accomplished much. Where on Dirty 30, they're immediately on the outs with everyone, where they had to essentially face one another in several eliminations. And Nelson did beat Hunter in the elimination, but after the second redemption, which Hunter came back on, Nelson let his anger get the best of him, and him punching Derek caused him to get DQ'd out of the game. Vendettas had him thrown into the first elimination of the season to take out his ally Cory, which ended up working, but he went under the radar for the rest of his time on the season after losing his ally, which was smart, where he only won a daily in the season, and he was the second to last man booted on the season via the Purge, so he made it far despite being on his own. He was in a really good spot on Final Reckoning as he was attached to Shane, who was running the Lavender Ladies as they were partners. And Nelson was keeping calm for most of the season, and the mercenaries caused Hunter and Cory to be added onto the cast as well, which just helped him. Despite that, he and Shane never won a daily in the season, but they won 2 eliminations against Brad and Kyle and Cara Maria and Marie. But they were sent to the Purge late in the season, and they lost the final redemption to Johnny and Tony. He would return on Total Madness after a few seasons off, and his behavior pissed off a lot of people, weakening his political and social stance on the season. But he did win an elimination against Bear mid-season, but lost to Rogan right before the final, where he sent himself in because he was getting thrown in anyways. Nelson thought that Fessel would be a good addition to the new Young Bucks on Double Agents, but he found himself in an early elimination for going against Devin, and Fessel saw this as a chance to get his star, taking out Nelson in the 3rd elimination round for the men. He would come back the very next season, and the Veterans Alliance definitely did benefit him, where he avoided elimination all season until the final and didn't piss off anyone off, which Cory did this season, but was eliminated in the final by Kyle. Ride or Dice had him winning 2 dailies, breaking his streak of not winning dailies for many seasons, partnering with Nerys, but they made poor political moves and ended up at the bottom once the format switched, getting booted mid-season, as he wasn't in as good as with the veterans as he thought he was. His final season ended up with him and Huhui getting sent home first over Kellyanne and Tristan on World Championship, which was a poor way to end his run. So Nelson does have a good elimination record and made it to the endgame on 4 seasons. But he has a few early boots, and he only made it to 2 finals, despite all the seasons he did, and the lack of strategy/politics and honestly intelligence really just hurt him overall. At 7th is Devin Walker, who competed on Rivals 3, Dirty 30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, Double Agents, Spice Dice and Allies, Ride or Dies, and Battle of the Eras. He's another one who has a relatively up and down career, and his career did not start off on a good note. On his first season, Rivals 3, Devin was the first boot with Cheyenne as they were thrown into elimination where they lost to Jessica and Johnny. Due to all the DQs and quits, they came back into the game and were able to make it to the endgame as a layup, partially because Devin knew the difference between the skulls in the draw just by feeling them, where they got 3rd in that final. 30-30 was easily his worst season as he was purged immediately and then lost the redemption to Tony. Vendettas was a season where he had something to prove as he won a few dailies in the season, which were all in teams, and he was able to beat Bananas mid-season, where he was able to gain some allies and made it very close to the endgame, getting purged in one of the later dailies. Final Reckoning was another pretty bad season for him, where he and Cory came into the game late with suspicious wins against Amanda and Zach and Jose and Devon, only to be DQ'd a few days later. And obviously he was initially a part of the season, but his father passed away right when it started, so he was out of commission where he quit, justifiably so. After taking 3 seasons off and essentially 2 years off, Devin came back on Double Agents and found himself on the outs where he was sent into elimination with Wes where he beat him and was on the outs for all of the season, but he did win a few dailies but still went out at around the 60-ish% point of the season with Josh, ironically. But this would cost the foundation of the vacation lines that would run the next 2 seasons, or you could say they ruined the next 2 seasons, depending on how you see it, and Devin was arguably the leader of it, as he was pushing for new champions, especially. He helped get all the veterans on the same page on Spice, Lice, and Allies, won several dailies during the team portion of the season, and his focus on getting a new winner was strengthened here, though he started getting very cocky and entitled. He took out Emmanuel in the final elimination before the final and got 3rd place overall. The scoring momentum continued on Ride or Dies, where he and Tori were thrown into the first elimination, where they did take out Kayla and Sam, but they would not go into elimination for the rest of the season, and they essentially dominated the final, gaining both of them their first win. It seemed like this trajectory would continue onto Battle of the Eras, since the Vacation Alliance were still working together and winning a lot of dailies, but he was flipped on mid-season after having a conflict with Bananas and Josh seemingly being wishy-washy, where he is booted against Callan in the last team's elimination. Devin has a few bad seasons and made it to the final on a few seasons, and he has a decent amount of meh seasons with a strong elimination record that's mainly tied to puzzle slash lack of physical activity. A bit up and down, but a bit more consistent than the last few below him. And he's been in more finals than the last few people below him, hence him being here. At sixth is Frank Sweeney, who competed on Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, and Free Agents. For someone who only did 3 seasons as I am recording this, and only 2 of those really count, Frank definitely made an argument for himself being a potential GOAT of the show and game. He competed on the Rookie Heavy Battle of the Seasons 2, where he was the leader of the alliance that, of course, consisted of San Diego, Cancun, St. Thomas, Vegas, and New Orleans to get out to the vets, though he had to cut some of the others within that alliance. Despite the dysfunction within his own team and his alliance overall, San Diego won several dailies, and he and Ashley won the final elimination against Jonay and Derek, where they did win the season. He was paired up with Johnny Bananas on Rivals 2, where they actually worked well together politically, socially, and even competitively, winning 2 dailies and doing well on a few others. They never went into elimination this season, and he could hold his own with the vets, getting second on the season. Unfortunately for him, he was essentially cursed on free agents as he pulled the kill card twice, having to take out Chet and Dustin before he was DQ'd due to sickness, but it could show that he could hold his own in eliminations. Frank is very versatile based on a short one, but his resume is still very short, where I am looking forward to seeing how he does on All Stars Rivals, where he's never actually left the game outside of a DQ, and he's never been booted early. But the lack of longevity and his win also being in a season that isn't seen as very competitive also somewhat holds him back. At fifth place is Hunter Barfield, who competed on Invasion of the Champions, Dirty 30, Final Reckoning, and War of the Worlds 1. So, like Frank, there's a ceiling regarding how high I could put Hunter, due to the fact that not only did he only do 4 seasons, but they were filmed within a short time span of 3 years. His first season was Invasion of the Champions, where he got close to Ashley, who had the Lavender Ladies on her side, and what was starting to be formed for him was the Young Bucks. He won the final daily before the Oasis to get into the house, stayed out of elimination all season and was able to make it to the end game of the season to be booted by the Purge right before the final, though it showed the start of his main flaw, which is puzzles and mental stuff. He appeared on his next season, which was arguably his most notable showing, Dirty 30, as he won several dailies, and some of them he won while he was injured, if I'm remembering this correctly, and was thrown into several eliminations in the season, where he took out Cory both in the elimination and in redemption, and Leroy, though he had to win himself back into the game after Nelson eliminated him mid-season. Ultimately, he was eliminated in the final purge right before the final yet again. Final Reckoning had him enter the season down near in the middle of the season with Ashley, beating Freaks and Angela, where they only won a single daily in the season, but the Young Bucks and the Lavender Ladies linking up this season, but it caused them to skate to the end, where he won with Ashley, though had his money stolen. His final season, as I'm recording this, is War of the Worlds 1, where he was thrown into the first elimination by Eventful Bananas due to his temper, where he and Georgia did beat Ashley and Chase, where he essentially crawled up under West throughout the entire season to guide him, where he did win a few dailies and never went into elimination again until the final, where he was taken out at 6th by Ninja. When it comes to the physical stuff, sans endurance, Hunter thrives, as he is very hard to eliminate, but his weakness is his social and mental game. Continuing with his lack of longevity, it holds him back, but he has a great record in eliminations and making it to the end game. At fourth is Leroy Garrett, who competed on Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Exes 2, Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, 3030, Vendettas, War of the Worlds 1, War of the Worlds 2, Double Agents, Battle of the Eras, and All Stars 4. I'm hoping that this won't be too long, but Leroy's first season was Rivals 1, where his initial partner Adam got DQ'd immediately, causing Mike to take his place, and they were able to actually lay low throughout the season, avoided elimination the entire time as rookies, and made it to his first final, getting third place where they were booted mid-day 2. His second season, Battle of the Exes 1, was disappointing, where him and Naomi went into elimination twice due to the poor performance in the dailies, where he did win the elimination against West for them, but they lost next to Emily and Ty the following round. His next few seasons really weren't that notable, in my opinion, like at all, despite him making it to the second to last male round on both seasons, being booted with Ty against rookie Jordan and Marlon on Rivals 2, though they were lucky that Zach DQ'd in their elimination earlier on in the season, where he also won an elimination against Kahara and then being booted against CT on Free Agents. Battle of the Exes 2 is arguably his most notable season, where he won 4 eliminations with Naya and Teresa, beating Bananas twice in them, Johnny Reilly, and West throughout the season, all of them known for doing well enough in eliminations, and winning a daily where he was the closest to being a winner ever in his career, as he got second place. His following 2 seasons aren't notable at all, and actually pretty bad, since he was booted extremely early on Battle of the Bloodlines, and he was booted on Rivals 3 as well, both due to an injury. The first one being due to his cousin, and the second one was due to his own injury, causing him and Avery to leave that season. He kind of just stuck with the veterans like Johnny, CT, and Derek on 30-30 and made it through roughly 3/4 of the season, losing to Hunter in an elimination and then losing to Jordan and CT in the final redemption. Vendettas was a disappointing season for him when it came to the dailies, where he didn't win a single one, but he avoided elimination until the final one where he did beat Brad, but he was in the bottom 4 of the final. War of the Worlds 1 wasn't a notable season at all for him, where he went relatively early on in the season, losing with his partner to Shailene to Devon and Bear. It seemed like he finally started to take the game and show seriously with War of the Worlds 2, where Bananas was booted early on in the season, where he joined Cam, Polly, and Cara Maria, and really took leadership throughout the second half of the season, where this looked like it was his best chance to win. But he was yet again in the bottom 4, with getting cut at the individual puzzle, despite doing a lot of the hard work for a majority of that final. What was supposed to be Leroy's huge retirement season, eye roll, was arguably Leroy's strongest season, where he performed well in the dailies, which was not the case for him throughout his career, where he won several of them with Casey and smoked his elimination with Jay to get his skull, but he got third with Nanny. His retirement ended when he came back for All Stars 4, where despite being in a good political position, though that was mainly due to Cam, let's be honest, and seeming like the guy to beat, he performed poorly in many of the dailies, causing him to be in the bottom group many times. He did beat Brandon in an elimination, so that doesn't really say much, but performed poorly in the final, getting 7th out of 8. And then on Battle of the Hours, he got last in the daily out of the Era 3 men, so he went in where he lost easily to Tony. Leroy is in the good but not great category, as he has never won and has performed poorly in most of the finals he was in, though he also performed in a lot of finals, and he got a lot of close calls with an impressive elimination record. At third is Cory Wharton, who competed on Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, Invasion of the Champions, 30-30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, Total Madness, Double Agents, Spice Lies and Allies, Battle of the Eras, and USA 2. Cory started his challenge career with a lot of promise on Battle of the Bloodlines, as he was able to create the record for the most daily wins in a season at the time, though most of them were for those team challenges that they did in the season, though some of them ended up being wins with his partner Mitch. He, not his cousin, stayed out of elimination the entire season, and they were runner-ups in the season overall. Rivals 3 was a bit of a sloppier season for him, where he was partnered with the drummer magnet Ashley, and he tried and failed to play both sides, which caused Dario to turn on him, being beaten by Christina and Nate in the mid-season, which wasn't the best look. Invasion of the Champions was another good season for him, despite being on the outs politically, as he was stuck with Jenna, Tori, and Kayla. But he won his elimination against Theo, where the latter essentially quit, and also beat Shane in the triple elimination after Nelson double snaked him. And he seemed to have recovered in the Oasis period despite not being on the right side, and the Young Bucks started around here, where he got his second final, placing third place. While the Young Bucks was a decent idea politically, it did start his poor trajectory on the show for a while, where he made the choice of not only cutting Darrell in Dirty 30, but going after all the veterans and making it known to everyone in the cast. He was thrown into the first elimination where he did beat Derek, but loses to Hunter in the elimination and redemption, being booed in the mid-season. Vendettas was even worse for him, as he was immediately on the out and was thrown into the first elimination where another ally of his, and Nelson, took him out. Final Reckoning had him arriving late to the cast, like around the 70% portion of the season, where he and Devin won two suspicious eliminations against Amanda and Zach and Devon and Jose. But they ended up getting booted after a round due to Cory getting violent with Tony. After being off for 2 seasons, he came back on Tour Madness on his best behavior, where he made amends with the people he burned and played a low-key game, despite Nelson acting like an ass, and getting into several tribunals of the season, while getting an easy skull against Swecky, but got third in the final, despite having a head start where it was looking like he was going to win. He was essentially cursed on double agents due to being paired with people who were essentially on their way out of the house, but he was never really targeted throughout the season, though some of this might have been due to the fact that he was immune during some of those rounds where he had no partner. Smoking the route in their elimination, which gave him his skull, and he was able to make it to his second final in a row, as he was working closer to the Big Brother people this season, where he and Cam got second place, though they were really fighting to not get third with Leroy and Nani. Spy Slice and Allies did show some of his flaws politically, where he's not as close to all the alumni, where, despite them all agreeing to stick together, he was thrown into an elimination with Bettina at the end of the pairs portion, where they did beat Amber and Chauncey, and it seems like he always chooses to work with rookies who are lower on the totem pole. When the mid-season format switch happened, he was at the bottom of his team, and he was the target over some of the other newbie men, where he was taken out by Logan here. Cory decided to do the spin-off USA 2, where he was working with the veterans, mainly out of necessity due to lacking numbers, and also had good relationships with the CBS newbies. But he didn't go into elimination the entire season, won an individual daily, and got second place again. He won the first daily on Battle of the Eras for the men of his era, but he was not in a good position politically, causing him to be targeted several times throughout the season, where he had to win eliminations against Brad, Derek, and Josh before losing the final male elimination to Derek. He has a lot of consistency in his most recent seasons, which definitely bolstered him up a lot on this list. He has a very good elimination record and many final appearances, but the lack of win, which shows a lack of a clutch, and his messy social and political game at times definitely limits him on the list. At second is Zach Nichols, who competed on Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, Free Agent, Battle of the Exes 2, Invasion of the Champions, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, War of the Worlds 1, and War of the Worlds 2. Zach is someone whose unlikability causes people to doubt his success and abilities, and also causes people to climb him even more, but he does have some short-sightedness at points that are rightfully called out. His most successful season is his first season, Battle of the Seasons 2, where he was on the San Diego team, and they ended up running the season. He was on the rare team season during the second half of the show, and was amongst a newbie majority season. So that is why a lot of people don't really count his win as a upper tier win. Despite that, the team won several dailies throughout the season, controlled things strategically, and he was able to win 2 eliminations against Jamie and Knight and CJ and Jasmine, though he was close to losing that one, and it gave him his only win. Zach was starting off on a good note on Rivals 2, as he and Trey ended up winning the first 2 dailies, but he ended up getting last place earlier on in the season, or maybe it was mid-season, on a daily, if I'm remembering it correctly. And due to him DQing via breaking the rules, it caused him to lose an elimination that he would have won otherwise, where they probably would have made it deep into the season otherwise. He did redeem himself on Free Agents, at least before the final, as he won several dailies throughout the season, won an elimination against Brandon, where he was voted in due to the kill card. He got his second final and 3 seasons with this season, but his performance on it was horrendous, as he got a very distant third place, meaning last out of the men here. He was a terrible partner to Jonay on Battle of the Exes 2, despite them winning a daily and getting close to the endgame. They actually did make it to the endgame, but the Exile twist bumped them out of it. Essentially, West threw him under the bus during that round so he could go home, where he and Jonay lost to Jordan and Sarah in an elimination and lost the final redemption to Johnny and Nani. Invasion of the Champions is easily his worst season, where the champions came into the game roughly 1/3 into this season, and he ended up being the first boot out of the vets, losing to Darrell. Luckily for Zach, arguably his best season came on Vendettas, where he was a part of the Troika several times, went a lot of the season politically with Tony, didn't really piss anyone off, unlike Tony, really, and would have won the season had that last minute sole winner twist not been introduced. So he was essentially robbed of a win here, essentially an individual win. Final Reckoning is another example of Zach self-sabotaging, where he had an easy path to the end and to potentially win. He and Amanda were paired together, where they didn't even have a vendetta amongst one another before the season, but they did create one because they had different allegiances, and while they worked together in the dailies, they couldn't pull it together. He sends them into elimination once they refuse to choose another nominee, where they are taken out in a sketchy elimination against Cory and Devin, and an injury takes him out at the third redemption, where they could have made it to the end otherwise. It was clear that he didn't want to be on War of the Worlds 1, where he blew up his spot politically between Bananas and West, and he agreed to take a bullet for Bananas, but didn't go through with it, though he and Zahida still went home relatively early against West and D, where he could have thrown it. I don't know if this was ever confirmed or not. His final season, as I'm recording this, is War of the Worlds 2, where he was on the other side of the power of his team, but he was too strong for them to get rid of, so he easily made it to the final without going to elimination, but got second place to the Brits. I do think Zach is relatively consistent, where he only has 1 or already 2 bad seasons, making it to the final 4 times out of 9, if I'm remembering it correctly, and making it relatively far on most others. But the one win and the elimination record, which is at 4 to 5, really holds him back. And first place goes to Jordan Wiseley, who competed on Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Exes 2, Dirty 30, War of the Worlds 2, Total Madness, Ride or Dies, All Stars 3, World Champions, and Battle of the Eras. Obviously, the choice for number 1 out of the Era 3 men was solidified from the very beginning of this list. And Jordan's record is just brilliant. Amazing. On his first season, Rivals 2, he and Marlon won a daily, and they had to win a few eliminations against Leroy and Ty, and Knight and Preston to get to the finals. But his performance in the final was not strong, which is something that he will work on, hence getting third place. Despite being in a good position politically on Free Agents, he shockingly did not perform the best in a lot of the dailies by his standards, though he still won a few, but though those might have been those large team wins, if I'm remembering it correctly. And he let his cockiness and arrogance get to him, as he threw himself in against Bananas mid-season and was taken out by him, which is arguably one of his worst seasons. Being partnered with Sarah on Battle of the Exes 2, they were well positioned politically, and they were arguably the best team, as they won 3 dailies in the season, beating Jonay and Zach in elimination, and they didn't overplay a la Wes and Teresa, making the right moves at the right time to get the both of them their first wins here. He would take a few seasons and a few years off before returning to the stacked Dirty 30 cast, where he was relatively under the radar for a lot of the season, outside of one moment where he was sent into elimination against Ammo due to it, winning 3 dailies in the season and holding his own. He was sent to redemption by Hunter after he sent CT to redemption, where they made those choices because they won the daily for that late game, and they were allowed to send someone home right away, where Jordan getting second caused him to return. There are only 2 returnee options for the men due to Nelson's DQ happening after the second redemption, where he won the season after getting injured very early on in the final. Jordan took another break for 2 years and a few seasons, where he made his grand return on War of the Worlds 2, where he was on the losing side of the stacked US team, where he was thrown into a few eliminations during the second half of the season, taking out Thea and Josh, and turncoating to the UK team, where he got his third win. So at this point, he won in a pair as an individual and a team season. On a rarity, Jordan did back-to-back seasons with Total Madness, and he was more focused on getting Tori her first win, but that failed. He did not win a daily in the season and got on Bananas and specifically Wes's bad side, where he was put into an elimination with Fessel that was not in his benefit and being taken out the earliest he ever has in a season at the fourth elimination, and this was at the halfway point, if I'm remembering it correctly. Jordan would join All Stars 3 to redeem his image, and he had a target on his back from the very beginning, as the people on this cast were mainly OGs that he didn't have to struggle against relationships with. But he did get into the authority a few times in the early rounds of the season, and he didn't have many allies on the season, where he had to take out Darrell in an early elimination, only to lose to the OG Mark in the second to last male elimination before the final, which is one of his weakest seasons, though it's still relatively solid despite making it to the endgame. He was partnered with Anissa on Ride or Dies, where they were protected by the Vacation Alliance and some of the other veterans, but he ended up on Jay's bad side, where he and Anissa had to take out his ex, Laurel, and Jack, though he got his revenge on Jay and Michelle 2 rounds later when he won that daily. He got eliminated roughly 2/3 into the season by Horacio, but was allowed to come back after taking out Casey and Kenny, and then taking out Chauncey and Amber out the round after, where he lost to Bananas and Anissa losing to Nani in the final, causing him to get third place, and it was one of the rare times where he lost a final. He was partnered with Kaz on World Championship, where they won a daily and took out Bananas and Justine roughly at the midpoint of the season, and then won the season in a tough competitive season based on the partnerships. Jordan came in on Battle of the Eras in a good position on Era 3, as most of the women were his exes, i.e. Tori, Janae, and Naya, or a real world alumni, i.e. Avery. The women wanted to keep him around, not just Laurel, and the guys couldn't do anything to target him due to the format of the season. He won several dailies in the season, many for Era 3, and winning 4 dailies in the individual portion of the season. He made it to the finals without seeing an elimination for the very first time, and was under the radar politically, where he watched the rest in the final, getting his 5th win. Jordan has never been booted early, made it to the final on most of his seasons, winning most of the finals that he's been on, has a good elimination record, and his wins are in a more competitive era compared to many of the multi-winning champs, not even mentioning that he did all this with a disability. No one in the era really came close to him. Ranks the Era 3 man who did at least 3 seasons. It was very straightforward because I do believe that there's a few less of them compared to the Era 1 man and the Era 2 man. There really weren't any janky or wonky formatting that the other two eras had to deal with, and I felt like the modern version of the challenge really kind of became a thing with Era 3, so everything was just very standard and straightforward with my qualifications and how I saw all of them. I didn't have to worry about discounting certain things based off the format of the season and all that jazz. Um, and longevity was somewhat of a factor, but it wasn't as much of a factor because they're still relatively newer in comparison. And I think due to the fact that there weren't many of them who won, due to the fact that the seasons became more individualized, there wasn't a whole lot of data for me to discuss. I'm sure that the Era 4 video is going to be even shorter because there's less data on them and they're still relatively recent. But yeah, that is my list and I'm looking forward to making more. Thank you all for watching and I'll be back for more content soon. Take care.